My name is Mia Bennett, and I'm 34 years old. The Christmas table was set the way it always was, the same red tablecloth my mother pulled out every year, the same mismatched wine glasses collected one broken set at a time over 2 decades, the same candle centerpiece that had somehow survived 3 house moves. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the whole downstairs, the kind of smell that used to mean comfort to me as a kid and now just meant bracing myself. I sat between my Aunt Sheila and my sister Renata, holding a glass of white wine I hadn't touched in 20 minutes, because I already knew where the night was headed. I'd known in the car, gripping the wheel a little too tightly at every red light, rehearsing small talk I hoped would get me through dinner unscathed. Renata had that look. The one she got right before she said something and pretended it was a joke. She'd already gone through 2 glasses of Prosecco, and her voice always changed after the second one, louder, sharper, like the alcohol sanded down whatever filter she normally bothered to use. My father was carving the turkey at the head of the table. My mother was refilling the mashed potatoes, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had hosted this exact dinner 30-some times before. My nephew, 7 years old and utterly unaware of the tension above his head, was stacking dinner rolls into a wobbling little tower, muttering something about it being the tallest building in the world. And then Renata set her fork down and turned to me, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, Mia," she said, tilting her head, drawing out my name the way she always did when she was about to enjoy herself. 35 and still single? Christmas must get pretty lonely for you." The table went quiet for half a second, and then it didn't. Uncle Pete laughed first, short and loud. Then my cousin Dana snorted into her napkin, and the laughter rolled down the table like a wave, everyone chuckling as if Renata had just delivered the line of the year. I felt my face go warm, not from embarrassment exactly, more from the old, familiar sting of being the family's favorite target dressed up as a joke. It's a particular kind of exhaustion, being the person everyone quietly agrees is fair game. You learn to laugh along, because laughing along is easier than being the one who ruins Christmas. This wasn't new. Renata had been doing this since we were teenagers: my weight, my acne, the boy I liked in 10th grade, my choice of college, my choice of career, and now, apparently, my relationship status. She always found whatever that year's insecurity was, and aimed for it with surgical precision. And every year, someone at that table decided it was hilarious. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to do what mothers are supposed to do: shut it down, defend her daughter. Instead, she gave me that warm, practiced smile she used whenever she wanted to smooth things over without actually addressing anything. "She's just joking, Mia," my mother said, reaching over to pat my hand once. "Don't be so sensitive." I'd heard that phrase more times than I could count. Don't be so sensitive. Don't take it so personally. And every single time it meant the same thing underneath: stop making other people uncomfortable with your discomfort. In 34 years, my mother had never once told Renata to stop. She'd only ever told me to stop reacting, as if my reaction was the actual problem and not the thing that had caused it. I felt the old familiar pull, the urge to shrink, to laugh it off, to let everyone go back to their potatoes. I could have raised my voice instead. I could have thrown my napkin down and stormed off like something out of a soap opera, exactly the kind of scene that would have handed Renata what she wanted: more attention, more drama, more proof that I was the emotional one who couldn't take a joke. Instead, I did something quieter. Something I hadn't planned, not really, though maybe some part of me had been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for the exact moment it would land the hardest. I set my wine glass down, slow and deliberate, the base clicking softly against the wood, and looked my sister straight in the eye. "Don't worry about me," I said, my voice calm, almost pleasant, the kind of tone you'd use to comment on the weather. "I've been married for a while now." Nobody laughed that time. My mother, mid-motion raising her glass for the dinner toast, froze completely, her arms suspended in the air as if someone had hit pause on her. The chandelier light caught the wine in her glass, and for a moment it seemed to hang there, trembling slightly. Renata's smile cracked at the edges, confusion flickering across her face, because in her version of the story, I was the sad, lonely spinster sister, the cautionary tale she liked to hold up beside her own marriage and 2 kids whenever she wanted to feel good about her choices. A married sister didn't fit anywhere into that narrative. It didn't fit into anyone's narrative at that table. "What are you talking about?" Renata asked, her laugh coming out thin now, unsure, like she was still hoping this was some kind of counter-joke she hadn't caught up to yet. "Since when are you married?" "You never said a word." I let the silence sit for a moment before answering, because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself at that table. I let myself enjoy it, just slightly, the strange, quiet power of being the only person in the room who knew what was coming. 3 years, I said simply. "You never asked." My father had stopped carving entirely, the knife hovering in his hand above the turkey, his eyes flicking between me and my mother as if trying to decide whether this was some kind of joke too, some elaborate bit the 2 of us had cooked up together. Except nobody was laughing, and nobody looked like they were about to. My nephew, sensing something had shifted even if he didn't understand it, paused mid-stack, a dinner roll balanced precariously between his small fingers. My mother lowered her glass slowly, the toast forgotten entirely now, her expression sliding from confusion into something closer to alarm. "Mia," she said carefully, each word placed like she was testing the floor for weak boards, "why wouldn't you tell your own family you got married?" I picked my glass back up and finally took a sip, letting the question hang in the air, because the answer was sitting right there in front of all of us, wrapped in red tablecloth and mashed potatoes and 34 years of being the family joke. I hadn't told them because for the first time in my adult life, I'd built something entirely my own. Something Renata couldn't twist into a punchline. Something my mother couldn't paper over with a practiced smile and a pat on the hand. And sitting there in the quiet aftermath of my sister's failed joke, I realized the real story wasn't going to stay buried much longer, because my mother's face told me she already suspected exactly who I'd married, and she was right to be uneasy about what came next. Her silence stretched long enough that my father finally set the carving knife down for good, resting it against the platter with a soft clink that seemed unreasonably loud in the quiet room. Renata, still clutching her half-empty Prosecco, looked between us like she was watching a scene she didn't have the script for, her earlier confidence draining out of her by the second. I let the moment breathe. For years I'd been the one scrambling for words at this table, caught flat-footed by whatever the joke of the year was. Now it was someone else's turn to scramble. "His name is Julian," I said finally. "Julian Ashworth." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading outward across the table in silence. My mother's face went pale, her hand tightening around the stem of her glass until her knuckles whitened. My father's jaw clenched, a muscle working visibly at the side of his face. Even Renata, who moments earlier had been laughing at my supposed loneliness, looked like she'd swallowed something bitter, her mouth twisting slightly. Julian wasn't just any name in our family's history. 3 years earlier, my father's construction business had nearly collapsed after a contract dispute with a much larger firm, one owned by the Ashworth family. I remembered that whole winter like a fog, the phone calls behind closed doors, my father's voice rising and falling, the stack of legal papers that lived on the kitchen table for months. He'd spent that time telling anyone who'd listen how the Ashworths had buried him under lawyers and hadn't cared who they crushed. I remembered sitting in this same dining room listening to him rage about it, watching my mother nod along. The two of them certain the Ashworths were the villains of our family's story. What none of them knew was that I'd met Julian nearly 4 years earlier, at a conference neither of them would even remember, long before the dispute ever started. He'd spilled coffee on my notes and spent 20 minutes helping me reconstruct them, and somewhere in that awkward half hour, something clicked between us that had nothing to do with business. When the dispute blew up, I made a choice to keep my personal life separate from my father's grudge, not because I was ashamed of Julian, but because I knew exactly how this family treated anything it didn't approve of. I'd watched them do it before. I'd watched them freeze out Renata's college boyfriend over a single comment at a barbecue. I'd watched them make my cousin's fiancé so uncomfortable that he found excuses to skip every holiday after that, until the engagement quietly dissolved. I wasn't going to let Julian become another cautionary tale whispered about at future dinners. So I stayed quiet. I got married in a small ceremony with 12 guests, none of them from this table, and let my family go on believing I was still the same lonely, single Mia they loved to tease over turkey every December. "You married into the family that nearly destroyed us," my father said, his voice low, more disbelief than anger. Though the anger was building underneath, I could hear it gathering like a storm still a few miles off. "They didn't destroy us, Dad," I said evenly, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. "The contract fell through because our bid came in underpriced and the numbers didn't work, not because anyone was out to get you." I read the paperwork, back when it was all still sitting on this table. I know the difference between a company being ruthless and a bid that simply didn't hold up. My mother set her glass down hard enough that it rattled against her plate, a thin, sharp sound that made my nephew flinch and finally abandon his tower altogether. "So this whole time, while your father lost sleep over that mess, you were sleeping with the enemy?" "I was building a life," I said, and for the first time all night, my voice had an edge sharp enough that Renata actually flinched, physically drew back an inch in her chair. While everyone at this table was busy deciding I was pathetic for being single, I was married to a man who respects me more than anyone in this room ever has. While Renata was making jokes about my lonely Christmas, I was spending it with a family that has never once made me feel small. Our table went dead silent, the kind of silence that used to terrify me as a kid, the kind right before someone got sent to their room, the kind that used to make my stomach drop. Except this time, I wasn't the one in trouble, and everyone at that table knew it. Renata's expression slid from smug to something closer to humiliated, color rising in her cheeks, because in one sentence I'd taken the exact insult she'd thrown at me and turned it back on the whole family sitting around that turkey. My nephew, still blissfully unaware of the weight in the room, went back to his roles, and honestly, I envied him for it, envied the particular gift of being young enough that none of this mattered yet. My mother finally spoke again, quieter now, almost pleading, her hand pressed flat against the tablecloth as though she needed something solid to hold on to. "Why didn't you just tell us, Mia? We're your family." I looked at her for a long moment before answering, and in that moment I thought about every Christmas before this one, every joke I'd swallowed, every time I'd laughed along because it was easier than making a scene. Every time I'd driven home afterward and cried in my car in the driveway before I felt steady enough to go inside. Because every time I've ever brought someone home, this family found a way to make them feel unwelcome, I said. And every time someone laughed at my expense, you smiled and told me not to be sensitive. I didn't hide my marriage because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I was protecting it from all of you. Nobody said anything after that. My father stared at his plate, at the turkey he'd stopped carving, as if the answer to all of this might be somewhere in the grain of the platter. My mother's eyes went glassy, somewhere between shame and shock, and she pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth. Renata just sat there, her Prosecco forgotten. The joke she'd been so proud of 30 minutes earlier now sitting like a stone in the middle of the table nobody wanted to touch, nobody willing to be the one to pick it back up. I finished my wine, stood up, and thanked my mother for dinner, calm, steady. My chair scraping softly against the floor as I pushed it in, because for once I was leaving that house exactly the way I wanted to, on my own terms, head high, with nothing left unsaid. I gathered my coat from the hall closet, feeling lighter than I had in years, and stepped out into the cold December air, the porch light casting a long yellow rectangle across the snow. Behind me, through the window, I could still see them sitting there, frozen around a table that had never once been as safe as it looked. If you've ever sat at a table where your own family made you the punchline, you already know how powerful it feels to finally take your power back. If this story hit home for you, hit that subscribe button and join our growing family here on Revenge Diaries 210.